Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Didn't expect that. That's really nice. It is so great to see so many faces at an event such as this, and I'm very grateful to have been allowed to come along and speak. It's been an extraordinary journey over the last few years that some of you may well have been on, and some of you would appreciate is purely a roller coaster ride, and that you actually end up in some place where you never ever thought that you would. But I'm getting ahead of myself to a great degree, so it's probably best if I give you a little bit of background. I'll avoid giving you a rundown of my early days in vaudeville, and we'll go straight to the fact that I've been a teacher for some 35 years. But not children, I teach adults. The difference between pedagogy and andragogy. I teach adults, not children. And I've been involved in the corporate sector, the university sector, every sector that there is. And I ran a company for a number of years, and I've always had an interest in equality, in the fact that people could be treated equally, because I'm old enough to remember what it was like to sit in an interview as an observer with a man that asked a woman if she was going to get pregnant. Because I don't want to employ you if you get pregnant. That's how far back, I can see a few disgusted faces here. That's how far back we're going, when people could do that and get away with it with impunity. We're a long way from that. We made some incredible progress in terms of providing equality of opportunity to everyone, whomever they may be. And we seem to have very quickly gone past that into an absolute cesspool of nonsense, which has been assailing us for the past 6 or 7 years, but really reached a point, a sort of tipping point, with the Black Lives Matters situation. I was always very interested in understanding why things happen culturally. It's my bag, it's what I like to do, and I love film and I love media of any kind. And it was many years ago that I first learned the importance of nuance, and I was taught it by a 96-year-old woman called Grace, who, when I first started my business, I was about 23 or something, very young. I was given a load of laptops by the council, and I was to go around and teach people how to use the internet. So we're going back a while, to the point where you had to say to people, now this is called a mouse. And if you move the mouse, you'll see the pointer move on the screen. And I had the latest technology. It was a 28.8K modem. Can you imagine 28.8K modems? We've now got, gigabytes. You wait for a picture to appear for 5 minutes as it came down one line at a time, which is an experience that young people won't remember. But I was invited by Bernardo's to teach some of their volunteers, and I went to Swindon, where the teaching was taking place, took my laptops, were being set them up, and in walked Grace, who was 96 years old. And she literally was something straight out of Downton Abbey. She was the most extraordinary woman, one of the most extraordinary women I ever met. Unbelievably stylish. Veil, beige, twin set, pearls, the whole works. She would not have looked out of place on the set of Downton Abbey. And she was a marvellous woman who didn't have any problem with speaking up when she needed to, but wanted to understand about this so that she could email her son who lived in Australia. So that's all she wanted to learn, was how to do email. And I remember starting the session, and she came in, she sat down at the back, and she lifted her veil, opened her glasses case, popped her glasses on, and we started. Okay, so today I'm going to teach you about, and it went right. Well, first of all, I'd like you to move the mouse, and you'll notice the pointer movement on the screen will correlate with how you move the mouse. And everybody's going, oh, that's clever, how do they do that? Nobody asks that now, we just know that they do. Oh yes, that's good, that's good. Apart from Grace, who I could see at the back frantically going like this with her arm. And so I walked round to the back where Grace was, and I said to Grace, you doing all right? Barry, my mouse is malfunctioning, it's not working. I said, well, that's because you're using your glasses case, honey. And she was moving her glasses case across the mouse mat and had missed the mouse completely. So we got her on that. And eventually she was able to send an email to her son, but she also did some research on the internet on the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And I said to her at the end of one of the sessions, I said to her, so tell me, Grace, what did you learn about the 7 wonders of the ancient world? To which she responded with, well, I can only remember a couple. I said, okay, well, what were those then, Grace? She said, well, so I distinctly remember the pyramids of Giza, I believe. And I said, yep, that's absolutely right. And then she responded with, and the hanging baskets of Babylon. Which I thought was, I want to see the watering can. Can you imagine the hanging baskets of Babylon? So me being the smart ass that I was at the time, and still to a very great degree am now, would always finish each session by posing a question that I thought was unanswerable. And at that time, we were just moving from using copper wires and very simplistic methods of communicating across the internet. And we were doing so by introducing fiber optic networks, which are now standard. It's the type of thing you would expect to be using. So my question that I would leave everybody with, and I'd usually do it with a kind of flourish, I'd say, so tell me, I said, we've been talking today about transmission of data at the speed of light. Tell me, if you're traveling on in your car at the speed of light and you turn the lights on, do they work? And then I would go, thank you very much, and sort of stroll out. So I was about to go, thank you very much, to that. It's unanswerable. That's what I thought. I was about to go, thank you very much, and stroll out, when this little bony hand at the back shot up and Grace shouted, the front ones do, but the back ones don't. And I learnt nuance from a 96-year-old woman who was born in the 18th century. Now that kind of ability to connect with another human being is absolutely vital, because our experiences and our ability to move forward in the world and create something that is worthwhile is absolutely dependent upon being able to straddle as many centuries as you can. You said earlier on, Rob, about 6 degrees of separation. Well, 6 degrees of separation can work historically too. My grandmother was born in 1891. Obviously she's not with us now, but she was born in 1891. Somebody who shakes my hand has shaken the hand of a woman who was around in 1891. Cancel culture has a vested interest in preventing that from happening. That's what cancel culture is. Cancel culture is an attack upon a vein of success going right back as far as any of us alive can remember, and hopefully we would have thought stretching out as far as we can think of in the future, that was based entirely upon the idea that the Enlightenment was important. And cancel culture may affect us as individuals, and it may affect us as groups, or it may affect you as an organisation, but the truth of the matter is, it is an attack upon the word Enlightenment through the stick of rock of humanity, and it is designed to destabilise and to break that up. That's what it is at heart. The fact that they might cancel me, or they cancelled you, or they cancelled Nick, is a symptom of a larger problem. And where we see the symptom festering most is within the education establishments that we would hitherto have trusted with our money. I've seen, since I started working on equality in a much larger capacity than I did previously, that I went to a university to provide some equality training for them, and we were doing so without any trouble at all. And that equality training was about understanding the various different protected characteristics, as well as understanding things that interacted with it, like the Gender Recognition Act, the Education Act, the things that interacted with it. But it was about the reality of it, not the lawfulness. It was about how did we get there? How did we get to where we are? Why did this exist? And how would we do it? And I was accused of being unsuitable in terms of being a teacher for the university staff, because I refused to go down the social constructionist route. I.e., it was said, we need you to go down the social constructionist route, to which my response was, I'm a teacher. I don't go down any route. I give people multiple viewpoints, and I let them explore and discover it for themselves. At which point I went, they got rid of me. And then I was also involved in another project, which was the same thing, this time with engineers at PhD level. And same again, Black Lives Matters happened while I was doing that project. And when Black Lives Matters happened, I got a phone call from one of the university professors saying to me, I don't know what's going on, but all of the students are refusing to come to their lessons today because of a hashtag on Twitter that says hashtag shutdown STEM. Now, some of you may have heard me speak about this before. So I said, that's okay, leave it with me for a couple of hours and I'll come back to you and I'll let you know what I find out. Tell the students don't do anything until they've heard from me. So I then went and did my discovery, and as I got through it, I thought, right, we're going to have to tell the students about this. I booked them in to see me an hour and a half later, so we had a Zoom call. It was obviously during the time of COVID. And I discovered that hashtag shutdown STEM was a hoax from 4chan, which had been retweeted by 2 queer reporters in New York, and subsequently picked up by Ben Shapiro. It then went viral because Ben's got something like 2.5 million people on Twitter. So I put together the information I needed into a PowerPoint presentation, and I went to the students and and said to the students, here's the truth of this. And it was, you know, I got the dates of when it was started, who started it, when was it first appeared on the internet, what it's been used for, why it's wrong, and what the roots of Black Lives Matter were, because I was going to tell them the truth about what I'd found out about Black Lives Matters, which is, of course, that everything they do is through a queer and trans lens. They are a far left, hard left organisation. And if they could have shot me, they'd have shot me. They were absolutely fuming by the time I finished. Not because I was wrong, but because I dared to interfere with what I and others term with their narcissistic compassion. And narcissistic compassion is the most dangerous force on the planet, without a shadow of a doubt. Because it is this idea that you're a good person because you do good things, even if those good things are actually bad things. Providing you can feel like you're being good, that drives you. So I then objected strongly to what I saw was happening within the department, and this included the introduction of pronouns in their signatures and bringing in other EDI specialists instead of me so that the students didn't have to see me. The students had said that they were unsafe being around me and they'd require chaperones. Right, bear in mind here, I'm not talking about 18-year-old twats. Right, I'm talking about 30-year-old twats. No, I'm kidding. I'm talking about only one or two within a PhD department. It was one or two was enough to be problematic. And it was fairly obvious at that point that what had happened was they'd let one in, and you've only got to let one of these people in, and you're done. Because they're there only to do one thing, which is to inculcate and activate power and oppression narratives based on whatever they fancy, and to do so to steal the time from the body they infest. They are parasitical. So whether it's an organisation, whether or not it's a university department or a university, once they get in there, you'll find yourself spending money on things like microaggression classes or reporting structures, which we'll come back to later, that kind of thing. Well, I thought to myself, this is very peculiar, it's most strange, and so I started to look a little further. And at that point, they got rid of me again. Now, so that's twice that's happened, two separate universities that I've been gotten rid of. And I'm left with no income at all. So I then decided, right, that's okay, I'm going to have to start doing this for a living and find some way to make money. And through the kindness of strangers and through YouTube and designing a 12-month training program or teaching program called The Winning Mindset for Warrior Teachers, I have put together something that is starting to bring in some money. And it's been extraordinary as a trip because I began to look at exactly why university students who are adults were suddenly behaving as if they were damaged children. And then I realized that the reason that they were acting as damaged children because they were damaged adults and they'd been damaged by the secondary schools that they'd attended. But the secondary schools had inculcated weakness and grievance into their minds at a very young age, and had done so in order to fulfill a neo-Marxist idea of utopia. When you begin to look at this at a micro level, rather than up there me going, this is what I think's happening, when you start to look at it in a much smaller way, you begin to recognize how this works. And it works by parasitizing everything. So they go into the university say, come in and teach PSHE, that's their latest Trojan horse, by the way. I'll come back to that. You want to know what that is? Sex education? Personal health and sex education, PHSE, that's their latest Trojan horse. But they will go in and they'll go under the guise of decolonization or equality, diversity and inclusion, which it's not. It's not equality, diversity and inclusion. It's diversity, inclusion and equity, or DIE, as I call them. Because EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, is equality of opportunity, diversity of thought, and inclusivity in action. That's EDI. DIE is diversity of immutable characteristics, inclusivity in the in-group, and equity, or equality of outcome, which is murderous. It always leads to that because it's a victimhood cult. Right? It always leads to it. So I started to look a bit more deeply at what was going on in the schools, and I was horrified to discover the standard of some of those materials that are being taught to children as young as 12. And I don't share the same concerns necessarily as perhaps women would, or particularly gender critical women, in that I'm not necessarily so bothered about what it is that they're blatantly teaching them, which is about sex, and they're doing it in a very stupid way. But I'm more worried about what's in there when you read between the lines. So I thought to facilitate conversation and questions, I'd tell you about one particular example that I came across recently, and that might act as a launch pad for you to ask some questions. Because what we don't currently have in this country, and we need desperately, is people who can read this stuff, who can see through it, who can recognise it for what it is. So in this particular PSHE document, as well as having encouragement to, for example, bring in various props that can be used for sex and get the children to identify them, and in the list they included things like vibrators and, well, you know, and things that you'd use in your wedding. It's just, they conflate everything. It's weird. And they had lubricant in there as well. I'm like, they're 12. If you need lubricant at 12, you probably should go to your doctors. No, I'm kidding. Right, but that's what they have, right? Right, that's what they have, lubricant. Just out of interest, there's a new lubricant available at Asda for Christmas called Tingle All the Way. I'm there for that. Right, so that's the kind of thing that they've got. And then they ask questions, and one of the questions was, how many people do you think report that they're having sex underage in the UK? Why the hell are they asking 12-year-olds that, I'm thinking? What does that have to do with teaching a 12-year-old that, you know, that sex is a thing and you'll be all right? Right? So I've always said it, and I've said it on my YouTube channel before now, when it comes to the far right, or the right generally, you keep it in the bedroom and don't frighten the horses. Right? That's the thing, isn't it? Right? You do it in the left, hey, fuck your Afghan. Here's the rule book. Weirdos, right? So there's this kind of intense need to absolutely micromanage the development of young people, as if a 12-year-old hasn't already begun to understand what's going on anyway. They have. So there's this weird sort of imposition of ideas. So when I looked into it further, I found this particular model that they use, which I think is the one that will possibly spark some conversation amongst us. And it's a model where they talk about an inner circle and an outer circle, right? And the inner circle is what's called the blessed sexuality circle. And in that circle, there is heterosexuality, sex that's not paid for, sex within a relationship, vanilla sex, essentially everything that we might deem to be standard stuff for most people, right? In the sinful section, in the section that is seen as sinful, is homosexuality, intergenerational sex, there's a red flag if ever there was one, intergenerational sex, sadomasochism, sex in groups, right? 12 and up, okay? So they've got this circles, they've got the inner one and you've got the outer one. Well, that's fine, right? These things exist. How you explain them to children is probably a question that should be asked much more deeply than they're currently asking it. But that's not why it exists. It exists so that they can set the kids up for the concept that if their sexuality is outside that very, very finely defined idea of what sexuality is, which, let's face it, everybody's is, right? So they've defined a really sort of bland, constricting idea of sexuality and said they're seen as the good guys, but all of this is seen as bad, is to make sure that young people growing up will then push back against the thought that the other things are bad so that they can make them appear good. That's pure queer theory. What they are doing is setting up a power and oppression narrative within the PSHE education that means that the children will see that if you want to be a sadomasochist, that's fine. If you want to sell your body for sex, that's fine. If you want to have sex with multiple people, that's fine. Whatever you want to do is fine, as long as you're not doing that. So they are assuming that through the gullibility of young children, that they are able to make those children take on ideas that would come under what would be called the queer theory canon. Gail Rubin, Judith Butler. Gail Rubin is quoted in the book for children, right? That's what they're doing. They're setting up a power and oppression narrative. The same when they say, very interesting question this one, name something that people who have penis in vagina sex can do. Right? They don't say men and women. That's not in it at all. Name something that people who are gay can do. And then you have to circle these different sexual activities that you can do according to whether you're gay or straight. And their idea is that there is nothing you can't do if you're male or female. It's the same. Or if you're gay, it's the same. In other words, sex is a flat line, any hole is a goal. because they want you to call it penetrative sex. They're eliminating the idea of sex at all. That's what they're doing, okay? And that's the equity. That's trying to get equity. In order to eliminate sexism, they do away with the sexes. I was like, well, I can come up with 2 or 3 things that 2 gay men can do that women can't. I'm sure that women can come up with 2 or 3 things that women can do that gay men can't. But they're asking this of 12-year-olds. Why do 12-year-olds need to answer that question? What is the game here? And the game is to inculcate queer theory and gender identity ideology into the curriculum as early as possible in order that they can achieve their aim, which is the eradication of sex. Now, the categorization of sex is what holds us, it anchors us as a society. That's where it starts. I've said this before about you and I being aliens. Do you remember? When we're up in space watching, and you say to me, well, those funny little fuckers down there doing it, I don't know, but there seems to be 2 of them. We'll call them men and we'll call them women. Right, it's a good start. That's where it all starts. What they want to do is to remove that and put gender identity above it. They want to have gender identity to have the absolute overarching definition of everything human will come from that. Which now means that the likes of Edgehill University, who I've heard about today, are now calling same-sex attracted people same-gender attracted. Homosexuality no longer exists. They do it to eradicate groupings that are based on what they see as heteronormative principles of how to organise the world. So then you look further and you see maths today. Jimmy's going to do maths today. Bob, who's a non-binary, whatever it may be, has got 8 apples. I'm not kidding. They are building it into the language of every single subject across the board on the national curriculum. And it's being done under the guise of PSHE. They're actually putting it across every element of the curriculum, and it's being done by hundreds of external organisations who are positing themselves as experts on either that or equality, diversity and inclusion. And I haven't found one of them that knows one thing about what they're talking about.
Excuse me, Barry, how does that, with the trans business that's all going through the schools and stuff, how does that come into, feed into that, about the boys can be girls and girls can be boys and the pronouns and all of that?
Well, that's about the idea is that if you can disrupt, that's what they're about. That's what you've got to understand. Power and oppression and disruption. That's all they're about, right? So if you can disrupt what would be seen as the normal narrative, which is based upon the Enlightenment principles, classic liberal values, that's the rock, isn't it? That's the word between in the stick of rock, right? So if that's what's keeping us going from way back when to now, right? They will do anything they can to disrupt that, and the easiest way to disrupt that is to remove the concept of sex from our vocabulary altogether, and that's the end game. So trans becomes a thing because it's seen as the latest thing, it's seen as subversive, it's seen as against heteronormativity, which is the enemy. And that's what they're teaching children in schools. This has a plan. It has a plan. And to take us back to the beginning of my little diatribe, can you imagine explaining that to Grace? Who'd lived through world wars, who'd lived through violence like we couldn't possibly understand, who may have started her life as a scullery maid, who may have lived through dreadful times and lost many people, and then have come out the other end, and she would have been 50 at the time the NHS was born, and saw some of the great social progressive ideas of what we did with the Greatest Generation, as they were called, and would then have had to have sat back and swallowed this. We betray what came before by allowing this to happen. We betray what came before by not speaking. And I think over the next few months, the Welsh government's just had a good kick in the backside. I don't know whether you know. A group of Welsh parents got together and took them to court. The court have accepted. And they will be ruling on that in the next 60 days. So we're expecting the Welsh government to get a good kicking. Scotland's gone completely mental. Right, and the only ones holding the fort right now seems to be the English Parliament. But if the English Parliament is able to be infiltrated by this nonsense like everywhere else has, life is only going to get far more difficult. And it'll be far more difficult for children because they're told that meritocracy is a bad thing. But actually it's all about inclusivity. For children, and it'll be for women particularly, girls and women particularly, females generally, and for gay men. That's where the biggest problem's going to be, because it affects us intrinsically, because of who we are, because we've been persecuted because of our sex. We've been oppressed because of our sex. These are not people that are interested in a class analysis. They're not interested in looking and saying, right, what are we going to do about the people that have got so much and these have got so little? These are people that are not interested in making social change that allows people to have the opportunity to be the best they can be. These are people who think that equity is a good idea. The equality of outcome is where it's at, not equality of opportunity. It's the same as a story about the kids with the teacher. They said to the teacher, it's unfair. Every time we do a quiz, they always get more than I do. Well, that's because they work harder than you do. It shouldn't be like that. All right, we'll do that then. We'll average it out. Everybody will take the test and we'll average it out. Did it first week, everybody got a C. Did it the second week, everybody got an F. Did it the third week, everybody failed. And then they started fighting. Because that's what they do. They try to blame one another. That's equity. That's victimhood culture. And it is that kind of behaviour and refusing to take part in it that allows them to then cancel you because you're part of a heteronormative idea of how we got where we are. Pure queer theory, pure gender ideology, pure critical race theory. It's all under the banner of critical social justice. And it needs to be fought wherever we find it.